Don Rickles, born Donald J. Rickles on May 8, 1926, in Queens, New York, emerged from humble beginnings to become one of the most legendary comedians and actors of the 20th century. Growing up in the Jackson Heights neighborhood, he was raised in a close-knit Jewish family, where his sharp wit and quick tongue became apparent at a very early age. These were traits that would later define an entire career and reshape the landscape of American comedy. His father Max worked as an insurance agent, while his mother, a devoted housewife, recognized her son's natural gift for humor long before the rest of the world would catch on. From the very beginning, there was something undeniably magnetic about the young Rickles, a restless energy and a boldness that set him apart from those around him. After graduating from high school, Rickles enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, initially driven by a sincere desire to pursue a serious acting career. His ambition was straightforward and earnest. He wanted to perform on Broadway or make a name for himself in Hollywood as a dramatic actor. However, his naturally fast-paced humor and sharp observational instincts slowly began pulling him in a different direction, one that would prove far more suited to his personality and far more rewarding for audiences everywhere. Before drama could claim him fully, comedy intervened and changed everything. Following his service in the United States Navy during World War II, where he served as a seaman aboard the USS Cyrene in the Pacific Theater, Rickles returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. Like so many veterans of his generation, the transition back to civilian life was not without its difficulties. He struggled at first to find solid footing, but his natural charm and charisma consistently drew him toward the world of entertainment. By the early 1950s, he had begun appearing in nightclubs, initially as a struggling actor who used comedy as filler material between his more serious attempts at performance. It was during these early club appearances that a critical realization took hold. When audiences responded far more enthusiastically to his quick insults and spontaneous humor than to his rehearsed dramatic material, Rickles made a decisive choice and leaned fully and unapologetically into comedy. That single decision would forever alter the course of his life and leave a lasting mark on entertainment history. What Rickles built from that turning point was something entirely his own. Unlike most stand-up comedians of the era, who relied on carefully structured jokes or warm, folksy storytelling, Rickles pioneered a completely different approach that became known as insult comedy. He would step onto a stage and immediately begin targeting members of the audience, regardless of their background, profession, or social standing. No one was safe from his sharp tongue, not celebrities, not ordinary fans, not even the most powerful figures in the room. And yet, remarkably, audiences adored him for it. His nickname, Mr. Warmth, was an affectionate irony that perfectly captured the paradox at the heart of his appeal. His words were biting, sometimes almost brutal in their directness, yet they were always delivered with an underlying warmth and a genuine sense of good-natured affection that made the target of the joke feel included rather than humiliated. A pivotal moment in his early career came when Frank Sinatra, one of the biggest and most intimidating stars in the world at the time, attended one of Rickles' performances in Miami. Rather than treating Sinatra with the reverence and deference that virtually every other performer in the room would have shown, Rickles boldly insulted him from the stage, making jokes about his power, his influence, and his larger-than-life persona. It was a moment that could have ended careers. Instead, Sinatra was utterly charmed. He became one of Rickles' most devoted supporters, introducing him to other major celebrities and effectively cementing his place within the Hollywood elite. This friendship not only elevated Rickles' profile dramatically, but also showcased two of his most defining qualities, courage and confidence, which made his comedy irresistible to anyone who witnessed it. From there, his career expanded rapidly. He became a regular fixture on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, and was a celebrated presence on variety programs like the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast, where his lightning-fast insults consistently became the highlight of each broadcast. Though stand-up was the bedrock of his career, Rickles proved himself to be a genuinely versatile performer. He appeared in notable films including Run Silent, Run Deep in 1958, alongside Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster, and later in Kelly's Heroes in 1970 with Clint Eastwood. His ability to hold his own in both serious dramatic roles and comedic ones demonstrated an impressive range that many people did not initially expect from a man best known for trading insults. In the 1970s, he starred in his own television sitcom CPO Sharky, where his sarcastic humor was channeled brilliantly into the role of a no-nonsense Navy chief petty officer. He also remained a fixture on talk shows throughout these years, beloved for his unpredictability and his uncanny ability to make even the most composed host dissolve into helpless laughter. Rickles' career experienced a significant and deeply satisfying revival in the 1990s and 2000s, largely thanks to his voice role as Mr. Potato Head in Pixar's groundbreaking Toy Story franchise. An entirely new generation of fans discovered him through those animated films, and his trademark sarcasm translated beautifully into the character in ways that delighted both children and their parents. He continued touring well into his 80s, performing in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and venues across the country, drawing audiences who adored his unapologetically old-school style and his refusal to soften his act for changing times. Unlike many performers of his era who adjusted their material to align with modern sensibilities, Rickles trusted his audiences completely. He believed, correctly, that people understood his humor came from a place of love rather than malice, and that trust was rewarded with loyalty that spanned generations. On March 14, 1965, Don Rickles married Barbara Sklar of Philadelphia, and their union would prove to be one of the most enduring and defining aspects of his entire life. The man who had spent decades as the self-proclaimed merchant of venom on stage and television revealed an entirely different side of himself when it came to Barbara. Friends and colleagues consistently noted the softness in his demeanor whenever he spoke about her. Their marriage was widely regarded as a stabilizing force in his life, an anchor in a world where the pressures of fame and ego so frequently destroyed relationships. Rickles himself had openly admitted that finding love had not been an easy journey. In his 20s and 30s, despite his rising profile in the comedy world, he had struggled romantically. His sharp edge, the very quality that audiences found so thrilling, often worked against him in personal settings. By the time he met Barbara through his agent, he was already 38 years old, a confirmed bachelor whose friends had started to wonder if he would ever settle down. What drew him to her, ironically, was precisely the fact that she did not laugh at his jokes. Unlike virtually everyone else in his orbit who hung eagerly on his every wisecrack, Barbara was unimpressed. And that unexpected response captivated him completely. Her grounded nature and quiet strength stood in vivid contrast to the superficiality of show business, making her in his eyes the perfect partner for a man whose life was otherwise dominated by noise, chaos, and the relentless demands of the entertainment world. Together they had 2 children, Mindy and Larry. Mindy pursued acting and carved out her own path in front of the camera. Larry found his calling behind the scenes as a producer. Tragically, Larry's life was cut short when he died of pneumonia at the age of 41, a loss that shook the entire Rickles family to its core. For a man who had spent his life dedicated to making others laugh, the grief of losing a son was a pain that ran deeper than anything his public persona could contain. Don and Barbara were devoted parents, and the loss left a permanent mark on both of them, a quiet sorrow carried beneath the laughter and the lights. In his memoir, Rickles shared that his grandchildren, Ethan and Harrison, offered him a fresh and entirely unexpected perspective on his legacy. While adults admired his decades-long body of work, his late-night appearances, and his groundbreaking influence on the art of comedy, his grandchildren were far more impressed by something far simpler. They knew him as the voice of Mr. Potato Head. To them, he was not the legendary insult comic who had sparred with Frank Sinatra or performed for presidents. He was the beloved animated toy from the films that defined their childhood. Rickles found genuine humor and joy in that generational gap, often joking that all his years of hard work in comedy had been thoroughly eclipsed by a talking plastic potato. When it came to personal animosities, Rickles was known to have very few genuine ones. His insults were almost always a performance, delivered with warmth and a wink. However, those who knew him best noted that one figure in Hollywood seemed to trigger something deeper and more personal than his usual brand of comedic antagonism, and that was Denzel Washington. Rickles, who had spent decades finding ways to charm, tease, and disarm virtually every personality he encountered, reportedly found Washington uniquely impenetrable. Washington's reputation in Hollywood was built on seriousness, poise, dignity, and commanding authority. He carried himself with a gravitas that left little room for the kind of playful disruption that Rickles thrived on. Unlike countless other celebrities who laughed along with Rickles' sharpest jabs, Washington was known for his stoic demeanor, rarely giving Rickles the reaction he lived for. To a comedian who needed the response as much as the joke itself, that silence felt like a profound rejection, not just of his humor but of him as a person and as a performer. In some ways, Washington represented the one audience member Rickles could never crack, and for a man whose entire life had been devoted to drawing laughter out of even the most resistant room, that single failure stood out far more sharply than any of his countless triumphs. On April 6, 2017, the entertainment world lost one of its most beloved and irreplaceable figures when Don Rickles passed away at his home in Century City, Los Angeles, at the age of 90. His death was attributed to kidney failure. Tributes poured in from every corner of the industry, from comedians, actors, directors, and generations of fans who had grown up watching him work. He was laid to rest at Mount Sinai Memorial Park Cemetery in the Hollywood Hills, a place that placed him among fellow icons of American entertainment and culture. His passing was not merely the loss of one extraordinary man. It was the closing of a chapter in the history of comedy itself, the end of an era when humor was delivered with a personal touch, a fearless spirit, and a warmth that made every person in the room feel seen. Don Rickles had lived fully, loved deeply, and laughed loudly, and the world he left behind was unmistakably richer for everything he gave it.